Imagine you are constructing a hostel for students,
Okay.
and if that building catches fire and people get hurt just because you didn't follow the safety regulations, you go straight to jail.
Because, ignorance of the law is just no excuse.
Exactly. But here's the catch. When you ask the government to actually see those mandatory safety laws, they put up a paywall. They literally demand you hand over 5,000 rupees just to read them.
Yeah, it's wild. We are basically dissecting the architecture of modern society today.
No.
We're looking at systems where the written rules have become totally detached from the reality on the ground.
And conversely, where these massive global institutions are operating entirely on unwritten gentlemen's agreements, welcome to the Daily Deep Dive 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik.
If you are joining us to get a comprehensive, unvarnished look at the mechanisms driving today's headlines, you are exactly where you need to be.
Right, so let me give you the roadmap of the 18 topics we are unpacking in serial order today. First, we are looking at the sudden collapse of the UK Prime Minister's government.
Which, by the way, marks Britain's 7th PM in just 10 years.
It's crazy. And then we explore the unwritten constitutional mechanisms of how replacing him actually works. From there, we move back to India, examining a tragic fire in Uttar Pradesh.
A fire that really exposes the deadly gaps in our building safety enforcement.
Yeah, which leads us right into that shocking reality of the government paywalling mandatory safety standards we just mentioned. And then what's next on the editorial side?
Well, we will also analyze India's immense logistical struggle to monitor banned pharmaceutical drugs, followed by this massive tech industry shakeup, where Kunal Shah takes over as the global CEO of WhatsApp.
Oh, that's a huge one. And then we unravel the highly technical mystery behind Telegram's global outage, the whole BGP hijacking thing.
Right. And finally, for the editorials, we look at the fierce state opposition to the Western Ghats Conservation Plan.
And wait, after those 8 editorial deep dives, we are moving into 10 crucial updates from the Press Information Bureau, the PIB.
Yeah, we will track how fertilizer ships are navigating a reopened Strait of Hormuz and India's new dominance in the global ship recycling industry.
Plus the expansion of the Kavak anti-collision system on our railways and the underlying data of the May 2026 Core Industries Index.
We'll also cover the DISHA 2.0 initiative for grassroots legal access, a major milestone in organ donation pledges, and a hard reality check on India's deep tech ecosystem.
And wrapping up the PIB, we have the mechanics of the new 2027 Hajj policy, the NEFIC's agricultural digital portal launch, and the scientific transfer of the ancient Rocky Gardy's skeletal remains.
It is a massive landscape today. I mean, really packed. But the through line is undeniable. We are constantly negotiating this fragile boundary between the rules we write down on paper and the complex, messy ways human beings actually behave.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with a system that has just experienced a massive shock, yet somehow continues to function on pure convention. June 22, 2026. A political earthquake hits Westminster.
Yeah, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer steps out of 10 Downing Street and announces his resignation.
Right after losing the confidence of his parliamentary party. And Britain is now preparing for its 7th prime minister in a decade.
See, 7 in 10 years is a staggering metric for a mature G7 democracy. I mean, we are looking at a sequence of Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss,
who famously only lasted 50 days.
Exactly, 50 days.
Yeah.
Then Sunak, Starmer, and now an incoming leader. The volatility at the very top of the British state is just becoming its defining modern characteristic.
And I want to break down the cascading failures that forced Starmer out because, it wasn't just one scandal. It was a total systemic collapse of political capital.
100%. First, you have the rise of Reform UK. Nigel Farage's hard right party absolutely demolished Labour in the May 2026 local elections.
Yeah, they specifically hollowed out Labour's traditional base. They took those crucial working-class Northern England votes.
And that electoral defeat basically shattered the internal party consensus. The moment a party leader is viewed as an electoral liability in Westminster, the clock just starts ticking.
Which we saw manifest in major cabinet resignations, right?
Yes. Health Secretary Wes Streeting walked out in May, explicitly stating Starmer couldn't lead them into the next general election.
And then Defense Secretary John Healey followed shortly after.
Right. And when you lose the health and defense portfolios in quick succession, you basically lose the foundational pillars of your government's domestic and international credibility.
Then you throw the Mandelson-Epstein scandal into the mix. I mean, Peter Mandelson was a major architect of New Labour, a highly influential figure.
And Starmer appointed him as the UK ambassador to the United States.
But then, in September 2025, when the unredacted Epstein files dropped, revealing Mandelson's deeper connections, the fallout was just catastrophic.
Even though Starmer sacked Mandelson, the damage to Starmer's personal judgment was permanent. I mean, by November 2025, his net approval rating had cratered to a dismal minus 46%.
Minus 46% is just brutal.
It is. And more damagingly, 64% of voters believed Labour was actively ruining the National Health Service. In British politics, the NHS is practically a secular religion. Losing public faith on that specific issue is fatal.
So this created the perfect vacuum for Andy Burnham to step into. And the way Burnham maneuvered this is honestly a masterclass in political engineering.
Oh, absolutely. He is the former Greater Manchester mayor, a really prominent one-nation Labour figure.
He literally just entered Parliament via the Makerfield by-election on June 18th, won with a 25,000-vote mandate, and mere days later, Starmer resigns.
The timing is not coincidental at all. It's entirely orchestrated. The party machinery recognized they needed a lifeboat.
Because as mayor, Burnham transformed Manchester's infrastructure, right?
Yeah, he built the B network, a highly successful integrated transport system. He essentially represents a bridge. He appeals to those traditional working-class voters. Labour lost to Reform UK, but his administrative competence appeals to metropolitan progressives.
Okay, so what does this leadership collapse mean for India? Because Starmer did have one major international achievement, the India-UK Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, the CETA, signed in July 2025.
Right.
So does a new prime minister mean we go all the way back to the negotiating table?
No, not at all. The India-UK CETA survives completely intact. It becomes fully effective on July 15, 2026, regardless of the turmoil at 10 Downing Street.
Wait, really? Just like that?
Yeah, because trade agreements of this magnitude are ratified state treaties. Unlike a system where a new executive might try to tear up a predecessor's executive orders, the Westminster system maintains strict continuity of state commitments.
So Burnham just inherits it?
Exactly. Burnham will inherit the treaty and preside over its operation. Plus, Greater Manchester hosts a massive Indian diaspora, meaning Burnham brings pre-existing, strong economic and cultural ties to India right into the Prime Minister's office.
It's like a relay race where the runners keep dropping the baton, but the civil service and the treaties, that remains intact.
That's a great way to put it.
But the mechanism of that handover is what truly baffles me. If a prime minister can just resign in the middle of a term, how is supreme executive power transferred to someone else without a general election?
Right, so we are looking at the profound quirks of the UK's unwritten constitution here. The transition of power relies almost entirely on constitutional conventions.
Unwritten rules.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Unwritten rules that are politically binding, but not strictly legally enforceable in a court of law.
The Indian Express laid out this timeline. Starmer loses party confidence. He formally informs the king. Then the Labour Party's National Executive Committee sets an accelerated timeline for a leadership contest.
Right, and a new leader is chosen by the party, and the king invites them to form a government.
All of this dictates the leader of a nuclear-armed nation, and it happens without a single formal vote on the floor of Parliament.
Now, contrast that mechanism directly with India's heavily codified system. Under Article 75, Clause 3 of the Indian Constitution, the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha.
So it's totally different.
Completely.
Yeah.
If an Indian prime minister's mandate is challenged, they cannot just quietly step aside and let a party committee pick a successor. They have to face a formal floor test.
They must prove their majority through a recorded vote in the House.
Precisely. The UK process is entirely internal. It's almost a private club deciding the nation's fate.
And the king's role is purely ceremonial under the royal prerogative, right? He doesn't evaluate the candidates. He just invites whoever the party committee says commands the majority.
Yeah. The perceived advantage of this UK convention is majoritarian efficiency. It allows a governing party with a strong majority to rapidly surgically remove a failing leader and course correct without paralyzing the entire country with a snap general election.
I have to push back on that, though. Isn't it fundamentally undemocratic that just the card-carrying, dues-paying members of one specific political party, a tiny fraction of the UK population, are deciding who runs the country? The general electorate is completely bypassed.
See, that is the fundamental vulnerability of the Westminster model. The structural assumption is that you, the voter, elected a local member of parliament based on a party manifesto. The mandate belongs to the party platform, not the individual occupying the prime minister's chair.
Ah, I see.
Now, bring that concept of efficiency back to the Indian reality, particularly within coalition politics, like the current NDA setup. If a leader falls in India, you cannot rely on an internal party vote.
Because you have to renegotiate the complex arithmetic of multiple regional parties.
Exactly, which necessitates the transparency of a parliamentary floor test to prove the alliance is still viable.
So we have this fascinating dichotomy. The UK relies on unwritten conventions that are strictly followed, while India has written, codified safety laws that are routinely ignored. Which brings us to a tragic failure of governance back home.
The contrast is truly stark. On June 22, in the Hazratganj area of Lucknow, a fire broke out in a 4-story building operating as a private coaching institute and a student hostel.
And 15 young people died.
Yes, 15 students. These were young adults aged 18 to 22, living away from home, just preparing for competitive exams.
The anatomy of this failure is just devastating. The fire itself started from an electrical short circuit in a ground floor server room. But I mean, a short circuit shouldn't result in a mass casualty event.
No, it shouldn't. The building itself basically became a trap.
There was no sprinkler system. The emergency exits were physically padlocked. There was only a single, narrow staircase for 4 floors of residence.
And the interior partitions were made of highly combustible plywood. Plus, the rooms were filled with cheap foam mattresses.
And the most egregious failure, there wasn't even a basic fire alarm to wake the students up.
The regulatory violations represent a total systemic collapse. The building did not possess a valid fire. No objection certificate from the UP Fire Service.
Let alone the fact that it was operating a high-density residential hostel in a mixed-use commercial zone without any municipal permission for that conversion.
And you know, this isn't an isolated incident. This is a terrifying pattern. We had the Surat Coaching Center fire in 2019 where students literally jumped from windows.
We had the Rajkot Game Zone fire in 2024.
And the Delhi Coaching Institute basement flooding recently. The regulations clearly exist, so why is enforcement a black hole?
Right, so what are the actual rules?
Well, the regulatory framework is really fragmented. We have the Model Building Bylaws of 2016 issued by the Housing Ministry, which clearly specify mandatory fire escapes, staircase widths, and ventilation norms.
Okay, but the word model is the giveaway there, right? They aren't automatically enforceable laws across the country.
Exactly. States must actively adopt these models into their local municipal corporation laws to give them legal teeth.
We also have the National Building Code, or NBC 2016.
Yes, which is an exhaustive technical manual mandating fire doors, specific sprinkler placements, and combustible material limits. Even when adopted, local enforcement via municipal inspectors is chronically understaffed and, frankly, often corrupt.
But coaching hostels present this unique jurisdictional nightmare. They fall entirely between the cracks of existing definitions.
Because a coaching hostel isn't classified as a commercial hotel, which would trigger stringent fire and safety audits.
It isn't recognized as an official university hostel either, which would put it under University Grants Commission safety guidelines.
And it's definitely not a standard residential family apartment. You have over 4.5 crore Indian students enrolled in higher education.
That is a massive demographic.
It is. Millions of them are migrating from villages to Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities like Lucknow, Kota, or Pune, searching for affordable accommodation. And they are pushed into these unregulated, mixed-use gray zones.
The state's failure to regulate these specific spaces transforms urbanization into a daily hazard. I mean, the Supreme Court has repeatedly expanded the interpretation of Article 21, the right to life, to include the right to safe living and working conditions.
Exactly. When the state allows a 4-story tinderbox to operate illegally, ignoring basic National Disaster Management Authority guidelines, it is a direct violation of fundamental constitutional rights.
It's like the regulatory framework is a sieve. It is designed, in theory, to catch these safety violations, but the holes are so large that entire unapproved buildings slip through for years until a tragedy forces an audit.
That's a perfect analogy.
But there's another layer to this tragedy. I found myself wondering, why wouldn't a building owner just voluntarily follow the National Building Code? Why not look up the required staircase width or fire door specifications just to be safe?
And that leads us to a reality that honestly left me speechless. Because, astonishingly, to read the law, you have to buy it first.
Right. A recent Hindu editorial titled, "No One Should Own the Law," dissects this bizarre contradiction. The Bureau of Indian Standards, the BIS, publishes these critical documents, but they put them behind a paywall.
If an architect, a small contractor, or even just a curious citizen wants a digital copy of the National Building Code to understand how to legally and safely construct a building, the BIS charges over 5,000 rupees for access.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If ignorance of the law is no excuse, how can the state charge you money just to read the law you're supposed to follow?
The mechanism driving this is the issuance of quality control orders, or QCOs. When the government issues a QCO for a specific product or process, the corresponding BIS standard is no longer optional advice. It becomes a legally binding, mandatory requirement.
So the moment compliance becomes a criminal requirement, paywalling the standard turns the rule of law into a privilege only the wealthy can afford.
Precisely. Massive real estate developers can easily afford to purchase thousands of pages of BIS regulations. But a local contractor in a Tier 2 city, tasked with retrofitting a house into a student hostel,
They are not going to spend 5,000 rupees just to check the legal spec for a fire door. They will guess or they will just ignore it.
The editorial makes a profound point about the ethos of governance here. The Right to Information Act established that public knowledge is a fundamental right. The government should not operate like a private, profit-seeking publisher selling copyrighted material when it comes to life-saving, mandatory regulations.
I understand that organizations like the International Organization for Standardization, the ISO, they sell their standards globally.
But ISO standards are largely voluntary benchmarks for corporate quality. When a standard becomes quasi-legislation in India, governing public safety, it fundamentally belongs in the public domain, free for anyone to download, translate, and implement.
The immediate step for universal compliance is universal access. If the state hides the rule book behind a financial barrier, the system is engineered to fail the smaller players.
And as the Ashes and Lucknow demonstrate, the ultimate cost of that failure is paid in human lives.
This theme of laws on paper versus reality extends far beyond buildings to what we put inside our own bodies. Let's look at the pharmacies down your street.
This is a slow-motion public health crisis driven by sheer logistical impossibility. The Central Drug Standard Control Organization, the CDSEO, has actively banned over 350 specific fixed-dose combinations, or FDCs, since 2018.
Right, let's clarify the mechanics of an FDC for the listener. This is when a pharmaceutical company takes two or more separate active chemical ingredients and combines them into a single pill or syrup.
Now, medically rational FDCs exist and are crucial. For example, triple drug therapy for HIV or combined inhalers for asthma improve patient compliance.
But the Indian market is flooded with irrational FDCs.
Yes. A company might combine a powerful antibiotic with an unrelated painkiller and a fever reducer.
What is the incentive to create a medically irrational combo pill? Why do it?
Market differentiation and profit. It allows the chemist to sell more active ingredients per prescription. But therapeutically, it is very dangerous.
Because the half-lives of the drugs might not match.
Exactly. Or taking an antibiotic every time you have a mild headache accelerates severe antimicrobial resistance. The CDSEO banned these 350-plus combinations because expert committees found they lacked therapeutic justification and posed clear risks.
Yet, numerous ground-level surveys show that if you walk into neighborhood pharmacies today, you can still easily purchase these banned drugs over the counter. How does a banned chemical compound continue to circulate freely?
It basically comes down to terrifying administrative math. India currently has roughly 11 lakh licensed physical pharmacies operating across the country.
11 lakh, wow.
To police this massive network, the state and central governments employ a combined total of roughly 3,500 drug inspectors.
That ratio is absurd. It's approximately one inspector for every 300 pharmacies.
If an inspector manages to thoroughly audit one pharmacy a day, it would take a year just to cover their local jurisdiction.
It's like having a national speed limit, but only 3 traffic cops for the entire state. Of course, everyone is speeding. The threat of enforcement is effectively zero.
And the regulatory architecture is also full of historical loopholes. For decades, the Schedule K exemption of the drugs and cosmetics rules allowed certain household drugs to bypass strict prescription oversight.
Right, and while they recently amended it to remove highly addictive codeine-based cough syrups, many problematic formulations remain in a gray area.
And now the physical inspection model is becoming obsolete anyway because of the digital transition.
Oh, right. We are seeing the explosive growth of massive e-pharmacies. Platforms like 1 milligram, PharmEasy, and NetMeds.
They operate at a scale that a local drug inspector simply cannot audit. Digital pharmacies introduce a whole new vector of regulatory failure. They frequently dispense Schedule H1 drugs.
These are critical prescription drugs, like high-end antibiotics or psychotropics.
Yes. Under physical laws, a pharmacist must maintain a separate physical register recording the patient's name, the prescribing doctor, and the quantity sold to prevent abuse.
But a digital platform operating from a centralized warehouse often bypasses that rigorous, localized verification. A user just uploads a blurry photo of an old prescription, an in-house digital doctor rubber stamps it, and the drug is shipped.
The government is heavily pushing the Janaushadhi Kendras as a tightly regulated, state-backed alternative providing safe generic medicines. But the broader open market remains deeply fractured. The state apparatus simply cannot scale its physical enforcement.
While the government struggles to regulate thousands of physical pharmacies, the tech sector is rapidly consolidating massive scale and power into single digital super platforms. Which leads us to the massive tech news. Kunal Shah becoming the global CEO of WhatsApp.
This is a seismic realignment in the global technology landscape. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg recently announced that Kunal Shah, the founder of the Indian fintech unicorn CSE, has been appointed as the global CEO of WhatsApp.
And this isn't just an executive reshuffle, it involves massive capital. Meta concurrently announced a $900 million strategic investment into CSE,
taking a 20% stake and valuing the Indian fintech at $4.5 billion.
So Kunal Shah is replacing Will Cathcart, the executive who successfully scaled WhatsApp to 3 billion global users. But we have to ask a strategic question. Why does Mark Zuckerberg want a 42-year-old Indian fintech founder to run a global messaging app?
The answer lies in the super app economic model. Consider WeChat in China. WeChat is not just a messaging app. It is an underlying digital operating system for daily life.
Right. Users utilize it to message friends, but also to pay rent, order groceries, book flights, and secure microloans.
Exactly. WhatsApp clearly has the user base for that. They have 3 billion users worldwide, and India is their absolute crown jewel, their largest single market with over 500 million active users.
They have the attention, but they have consistently struggled to monetize it aggressively. I mean, they launched WhatsApp Pay utilizing the UPI infrastructure in India, but it has not managed to unseat the dominance of Google Pay or PhonePe.
The messaging is ubiquitous, but the financial behavior hasn't shifted to the platform.
Enter CSE. Kunal Shah built a platform that initially focused on rewarding high-trust individuals for paying their credit card bills on time.
But he rapidly expanded that into a lucrative ecosystem of high-margin personal loans, insurance products, and wealth management tools.
So by bringing Shah to the helm of WhatsApp and heavily investing in CSE, Meta is attempting a massive integration.
They want to fuse WhatsApp's unmatched distribution network with CSE's sophisticated fintech engineering and risk assessment models. The goal is to finally evolve WhatsApp from a simple chat interface into the ultimate, indispensable super app for India and the emerging global south.
Indian tech leaders are no longer just managing the back end. They are dictating global strategy for the world's most powerful platforms. It is a profound narrative shift.
However, we must critically evaluate the immense regulatory friction this mega merger will inevitably generate.
Yeah, specifically the Competition Commission of India, the CCI, right? They're mandated to prevent monopolistic practices.
Exactly. Bundling a dominant messaging monopoly like WhatsApp with proprietary financial services and lending algorithms raises severe antitrust alarms.
If you seamlessly integrate loan products into an app that 500 million Indians check 20 times a day, are you fundamentally stifling competition? A competing standalone finance app simply cannot afford that cost of customer acquisition.
Furthermore, the data integration is a legal minefield. India's new Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the DPDP Act of 2023, is highly stringent.
WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption architecture and its metadata tracking are already under intense scrutiny by the Reserve Bank of India and the IT Ministry.
So having an Indian CEO might provide some cultural and political capital in New Delhi, but ensuring cross-border data flows and localization compliance for emerged social financial behemoth is going to be incredibly complex.
WhatsApp connects billions seamlessly, but another massive messaging app just found out how fragile digital connections can be when they run into government roadblocks. Let's talk about the technical controversy with Telegram.
Right. Telegram's global blocking and the phenomenon of BGP hijacking. The Indian government recently attempted to restrict access to Telegram, issuing a confidential order under Section 69A of the Information Technology Act.
From a domestic legal standpoint, it was a standard procedure, but the fallout was unprecedented. Telegram CEO Pavel Durov publicly claimed that India's attempt to block Telegram caused a massive global bleed.
Users across Europe and parts of Asia were suddenly unable to access the app, and Durov blamed a technical error involving dormant infrastructure from Reliance Communications in India.
How does a local legal order from New Delhi end up crashing an app for someone sitting in a cafe in Paris? To understand the mechanics of this, we need to unpack how the internet actually routes information. What exactly is BGP?
BGP stands for Border Gateway Protocol. The internet is not a single cohesive cloud. It is a massive patchwork of over 70,000 distinct autonomous networks.
Like internet service providers, Jio and Airtel in India or AT&T in the US.
Yes, BGP is the underlying language these distinct networks use to communicate with each other.
BGP is like the internet's GPS system. It constantly calculates the most efficient path for data packets to travel across continents.
Precisely. An ISP uses BGP to broadcast an announcement to the rest of the world. It essentially says, I hold the most direct, fastest route to reach Telegram's specific IP addresses. Route your user traffic through my infrastructure.
So when the Indian Ministry of Electronics and IT issues a Section 69A blocking order, the ISPs usually implement it domestically. They might use DNS blocking, which simply removes Telegram's name from the local digital phone book so your browser can't resolve the address.
Or they block the IP address at the local firewall. But occasionally, an ISP will execute the block by modifying their BGP announcements. They instruct their internal network routers. If you see traffic destined for Telegram, route it to a null interface, a dead end.
But if that modified announcement accidentally leaks outside the borders of India?
That is the catastrophic failure point. If an Indian ISP accidentally broadcasts that localized dead-end route to its international peering partners, the global BGP system updates automatically.
Wait, so suddenly major routers in Europe or Southeast Asia update their tables, incorrectly believing that the fastest best path to reach Telegram servers is actually through this specific network in India.
Exactly. So millions of European data packets are sent zooming down the digital highway toward Mumbai, only to hit a brick wall and get dropped entirely.
If an Indian ISP accidentally moves the digital traffic cone too far, suddenly intranet traffic in Europe gets sent into a ditch.
Global Internet monitoring services detected exactly this anomaly. They saw highly unusual BGP routing announcements originating from Indian infrastructure during the time of the attempted block.
And the Indian IT ministry maintained it was merely a localized technical glitch during implementation, fiercely denying deliberate hijacking.
The opacity of the legal mechanism makes the technical failure worse. Section 69A orders are entirely confidential. The public and international watchdogs don't even know what technical method the government legally demanded the ISPs use.
Without public accountability, technical glitches quickly escalate into international geopolitical accusations.
The technological community has a solution for this called RKKI Resource Public Key Infrastructure. It introduces cryptographic signatures to BGP announcements, essentially requiring digital proof of identity before a router accepts a new traffic path.
Preventing fake or accidental routes from propagating globally. But the global adoption of RPKI is slow and expensive.
It perfectly illustrates how foundational internet protocols, built decades ago on the assumption of mutual trust between network operators, are fundamentally breaking down in an era of sovereign firewalls.
From the digital infrastructure connecting the world, we must pivot to the physical and ecological infrastructure that literally keeps the Indian Peninsula alive, the Western Ghats.
This is arguably one of the most intractable, deeply emotional policy deadlocks in the country. We're currently looking at the 6th draft of the Ecologically Sensitive Area, the ESA notification issued by the Ministry of Environment.
The center's objective is to formally protect 56,825 square kilometers, which is roughly 37% of the entire Western Ghats mountain range.
The notification seeks to impose strict bans on commercial mining, quarrying, highly polluting industries, and large-scale thermal power plants within this designated zone.
However, the center is facing intense, highly organized political and social opposition from the states that actually host the Ghats.
We need to examine both sides of this divide impartially. On the conservation side, the data is written in absolute tragedy. The devastating Wayanad landslides in July 2024 resulted in massive casualties and wiped out entire villages.
It provided irrefutable proof that unchecked deforestation and construction in the upper elevations of the Ghats directly engineer ecological disasters.
The mechanism is clear. The dense root systems of the native forests act as a sponge during the intense monsoon. When you replace that forest cover with concrete or shallow-rooted cash crops, the soil loses its water-holding capacity.
Heavy rainfall immediately triggers massive soil liquefaction, leading to scenarios resembling glacial lake outburst floods, where millions of tons of mud and debris accelerate down the slopes.
If the remaining 35% of the primary forest isn't legally protected, the structural integrity of the mountains will simply fail.
That is the terrifying ecological reality. But the state governments are presenting genuine livelihood and constitutional roadblocks. Kerala, for instance, strongly objects because the center's proposed ESA boundaries encompass areas with over 500,000 long-term residents.
The Kerala government argues for the recognition and exemption of cultural landscapes. These are areas where human settlement and agriculture have existed for generations.
If you impose a blanket ESA notification, it heavily restricts infrastructure development, road building, and local agricultural expansion. You essentially freeze the local economy and displace established communities.
Karnataka presents a different economic argument. They are fighting to protect their massive, highly lucrative coffee and spice plantation economy, which heavily relies on modifying the landscape.
Additionally, there is intense pressure from the powerful mining lobbies operating in Bellary and South Karnataka who stand to lose access to rich mineral deposits.
Beyond the economic arguments, there is a fundamental constitutional conflict. Under the Forest Rights Act of 2006 and the PISA Act, tribal and traditional forest-dwelling communities have legally recognized rights over forest land and resources.
The law explicitly mandates that you cannot simply draw a boundary line on a satellite map and declare an area a restricted zone without the formal, prior, and informed consent of the local Gram Sabhas, the village councils.
Faced with this deadlock, the center is attempting a staggered regulatory approach. They are proposing to formally notify the ESA in the northern states first, like Gujarat, Goa, and Maharashtra, where the state governments are more amenable to the boundaries.
But leading ecologists argue this political compromise is scientifically disastrous. Creating a partial ESA protects the less biodiverse northern ranges while leaving the southern Ghats completely vulnerable.
And the southern Ghats contain the steepest slopes, the highest rainfall, and the most fragile endemic species.
So what are we saying here? If we protect the forest, the farmers starve. If we protect the farmers, the mountain collapses on them. Is ecotourism the only middle ground?
Models like high-value, strictly regulated ecotourism offer a theoretical middle ground. But as we've seen throughout this deep dive, India's capacity to strictly enforce complex regulations is severely compromised.
Having navigated these deep editorial waters, let's accelerate into our rapid-fire segment covering 10 critical updates from the PIB, starting with an international bottleneck that directly feeds our nation. Let's look at fertilizer supply chains.
PIB highlight number 1 focuses on the immediate aftermath of the U.S.-Iran Muscat Accord. This diplomatic agreement resulted in the reopening of the highly contested Strait of Hormuz.
Almost immediately, 4 massive cargo ships carrying vital supplies of DAP and urea across the strait, securely heading for Indian ports.
To understand why the movement of 4 ships warrants national attention, we have to look at the agricultural calendar. The timing is absolutely critical. India is currently deep into the Kharif sowing season.
Millions of farmers across Punjab, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh are planting their summer crops. They desperately need diammonium phosphate, or DAP.
DAP is utilized as a basal dose. It must be applied to the soil right at the time of sowing to ensure strong root development. It cannot be delayed.
When geopolitical tensions forced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, India's incoming supply of these critical fertilizers dropped by a staggering 60%.
The supply chain shock threatened to severely impact the national crop yield. The government's response highlights how geopolitical shocks instantly translate into domestic financial burdens.
To ensure the farmers didn't face massive price hikes, the central government had to absorb the spiked international procurement costs. They injected an emergency additional 25,000 crore rupee fertilizer subsidy just in the month of May.
It is a stark reminder that a blocked waterway in the Middle East directly drains the Indian exchequer to maintain domestic food security.
From geopolitical supply chains to the circular economy, our second PIB update shifts to dismantling ships. The data confirms that India has officially surpassed Bangladesh and Pakistan to cement its position as the world's top ship recycling nation for 2025.
Indian yards, predominantly the massive, sprawling operations at Alang in Gujarat, handled an impressive 36% of the total global volume of decommissioned vessels.
This dominance plays a crucial role in India's broader circular economy. When a massive oil tanker or cargo ship reaches the end of its life, it is essentially a floating iron mine.
Dismantling these vessels provides massive quantities of scrap steel, which directly feeds India's secondary steel manufacturing sector, reducing our reliance on newly mined iron ore.
However, the mechanics of shipbreaking are notoriously dangerous. You aren't just cutting clean steel. These older vessels are laden with highly hazardous materials.
Asbestos insulation, heavy metals in the paint, residual toxic sludge in the fuel tanks, that is the critical environmental friction point.
India enacted the Ship Recycling Act in 2019 specifically to legally align our domestic practices with the stringent environmental and labor safety standards of the International Hong Kong Convention.
But while the legal framework exists to handle this toxic waste responsibly, continuously monitoring and enforcing these hazardous waste protocols across hundreds of active breaking yards remains a severe operational challenge.
Moving from circular economy hazards to infrastructure safety, PIB number 3 details the expansion of the Kavak system. The Ministry of Railways has officially approved a 270 crore rupee deployment of the Kavak anti-collision system over 631 route kilometers, specifically on the East Coast Railway network.
Kavak is India's indigenously developed train collision avoidance system. It relies on a network of radio frequency identification tags placed along the tracks that communicate continuously with receivers in the locomotive.
The primary mechanism is designed to prevent CPA signal passing at danger.
If a loco pilot misses a red signal due to dense fog or human error and continues accelerating toward a potential collision, the Kavak system automatically overrides the manual controls.
It cuts the engine power and automatically applies the braking systems to halt the train before a disaster occurs.
The prioritization of the East Coast Railway is highly significant. This specific corridor handles massive, heavy-haul freight traffic, coal, and iron ore alongside dense passenger services.
Furthermore, deploying it here is a direct, accelerated policy response to the tragic vulnerability exposed by the devastating Balasore train accident.
It is a critical safety upgrade, though the scale of the challenge is daunting. Outfitting the entire 68,000-kilometer Indian railway network with Kavach is projected to require nearly 2 lakh crore rupees and take several years of continuous installation.
Let's shift from infrastructure safety to overall economic health. PIB number 4 highlights the Core Industries Index for May 2026. The data shows that the 8 core industries registered a combined growth rate of 5.4%.
This index is a crucial vital sign for the national economy because these 8 sectors make up over 40% of the total weight of the broader index of industrial production.
When we break down the index composition, we see fascinating cross-currents. The overall 5.4% growth was heavily driven by a massive surge in coal production and cement manufacturing,
which strongly indicates a robust, ongoing domestic push in infrastructure construction and real estate development.
But the data also perfectly reflects the geopolitical instability we discussed with the fertilizer ships. The prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz severely disrupted crude oil and natural gas shipments.
Consequently, the metrics for crude oil extraction, natural gas production, and refinery products all slipped into negative growth territory for the month. The raw materials simply couldn't reach the domestic facilities.
From economic indices to access to legal justice, for our 5th PIB update, the Ministry of Law and Justice launched the revamped Disha 2.0 scheme,
designing innovative solutions for holistic access to justice. This represents a major structural revamp of how legal aid is delivered to the most marginalized citizens.
The scheme focuses on establishing permanent, functional legal clinics directly at the Gram Panchayat level.
It also funds the deployment of mobile legal aid vans equipped with technology to reach remote, underserved tribal and rural blocks. The operational machinery driving this is NALSA, the National Legal Services Authority.
We must understand the constitutional mandate driving Disha 2.0. Article 39A of the Directive Principles of State Policy explicitly requires the state to provide free legal aid.
To ensure that opportunities for securing justice are not denied to any citizen due to economic or other disabilities. As we discussed earlier regarding the paywalled building codes, if the legal system is complex and financially inaccessible, rights exist only on paper.
Disha 2.0 attempts to bridge that gap by taking the justice delivery mechanism directly to the citizen's doorstep, particularly by integrating online dispute resolution platforms to quickly mediate common property and family disputes.
without dragging them into the backlogged formal court system.
That brings us halfway through our PIB updates. Moving from legal access to saving lives, PIB number 6 covers a major health milestone. The Ministry of Health announced that India has officially crossed 5 lakh registered organ donation pledges on the National Registry.
It is a milestone worth acknowledging, representing growing awareness. However, the macro data reveals a stark, sobering reality. India's actual organ donation rate remains abysmal.
We currently sit at roughly 0.86 donors per million population. To put that in perspective, a country like Spain achieves nearly 50 donors per million population.
The gap is vast. India relies overwhelmingly on living donor situations where a healthy family member voluntarily donates a kidney or a portion of their liver to a relative.
Cadaveric donation, the process of retrieving viable organs from patients who have been declared brain dead in an ICU, is severely lagging.
The legal architecture governing this process is THOTA, the Transplantation of Human Organs and Tissues Act, which is managed at the federal level by NATO.
While there is undeniable cultural hesitation surrounding bodily integrity after death, a massive part of the failure is purely infrastructural.
Many regional hospitals simply lack the specialized neurological committees and protocols required to rapidly legally certify brain death. Without that swift legal certification, the extremely narrow window of time to preserve and transport viable organs closes completely.
Let's transition from saving lives to tech futures. PIB number 7 provides a critical reality check on India's deep tech ecosystem. The government highlighted that India now boasts 111 unicorns and maintains its position as the third largest startup ecosystem globally.
Those are impressive top-line numbers. But when we dig into the composition of those startups, a glaring structural weakness emerges. The critical metric is research and development expenditure.
India consistently spends only about 0.64% of its GDP on R&D. In stark contrast, global competitors like the United States and China are investing between 2.5 and 3.5% directly into research.
What does that percentage difference mean in reality? It means that India absolutely dominates consumer technology. We are world-class at building massive food delivery logistics apps, fintech payment interfaces, and e-commerce platforms.
But we still lag in actual deep tech. Deep tech isn't another consumer app. It involves fundamental scientific breakthroughs.
Quantum computing architecture, silicon photonics, advanced semiconductor design, next-generation solid-state battery materials. Because we underfund foundational R&D, we are essentially building highly efficient digital storefronts, but we are fundamentally failing to invent the underlying proprietary technologies.
Right, from tech futures to modernizing ancient traditions. PID number 8 covers the Hajj policy for 2027. The Ministry of Minority Affairs has successfully negotiated a bilateral quota with Saudi Arabia, allowing roughly 1.75 lakh Indian pilgrims to undertake the journey.
Looking at this impartially as a matter of long-term policy evolution, the Hajj management process provides a fascinating case study in administrative modernization.
Historically, the process involved complex state subsidies for air travel. However, following a landmark 2012 Supreme Court ruling, the government initiated a phased reduction, completely eliminating the Hajj subsidy by 2018.
Today, the entire process is fully digitized and subsidy-free. The government utilizes advanced data systems and randomized AI-driven lottery allocations to ensure fairness and transparency in selecting the pilgrims.
The most compelling governance aspect of this transition is resource reallocation. The state did not simply pocket the saved funds.
The ministry systematically redirected the exact funds previously used for the travel subsidy into targeted educational initiatives. Specifically, they massively expanded pre-matric and post-matric scholarships, focused entirely on promoting education for the girl child within minority communities.
Modernizing their approach to minority welfare. Now, modernizing agriculture. PIB number 9 covers the launch of NAFEX.in by Home and Cooperation Minister Amit Shah.
NAFEX is the new national digital auction portal for NAFED, the apex agricultural cooperative marketing federation in India.
The launch of a single web portal might sound administrative, but its macroeconomic impact on agricultural supply chains is immense. The primary target of NAFEX is the opacity of the traditional middleman.
Let's explain the mechanism. NAFED is tasked with procuring massive buffer stocks of essential commodities like pulses and oilseeds directly from farmers at minimum support prices.
This prevents price crashes. But historically, when NAFED needed to dispose of those massive stockpiles back into the open market, the physical auction process within the traditional Mandi system was opaque, localized, and easily manipulated by cartels of large traders.
NAFEX entirely digitizes that disposal auction. By moving the inventory to a national digital platform, it enforces transparent, real-time price discovery. Buyers from across the country can bid simultaneously.
Crucially, the platform lowers the barriers to entry, allowing formalized farmer-producer organizations, or FPOs, to participate directly in the national digital marketplace.
An FPO in Maharashtra can now efficiently purchase bulk stock without paying compounding commission fees to layers of local intermediaries.
Finally, protecting our ancient past, PIB number 10. We conclude our deep dive by looking back thousands of years. The critical human skeletal remains excavated from the ancient Indus Valley Civilization site at Rakhigarhi in Haryana have been formally transferred to the Anthropological Survey of India.
This transfer represents a highly significant shift in India's approach to heritage management and scientific sovereignty. Previously, these immensely valuable remains were often dispersed, held by various agricultural universities or private archaeological research teams.
The NSI operates directly under the Ministry of Culture and serves as the nation's premier anthropological research body. Consolidating the remains under their jurisdiction ensures that advanced, highly sensitive research methodologies are conducted strictly under sovereign ethical oversight.
We are talking about extracting ancient DNA, or aDNA, and conducting complex, stable isotope analysis on the bone collagen to determine exact migration patterns and dietary habits from 4,500 years ago.
And this centralization addresses deep, valid concerns raised by indigenous and tribal advocacy groups. There has been a long-standing fear that the unique genetic material of ancient subcontinental populations could be quietly shipped off to well-funded foreign universities or private laboratories.
By placing the Rakhigarhi remains under the NSI, the state guarantees that any genetic sequencing or historical narrative building remains under Indian institutional control, protected by stringent, localized ethical guidelines regarding human remains.
And with that, we have traversed an absolute mountain of information. Let's synthesize the terrain we've covered today. From the unwritten laws of British politics to the paywalled laws of Indian building safety, from the algorithms routing our internet to the ecological boundaries saving our mountains.
We tracked how unseen technical protocols like BGP silently govern the global internet, and how easily a clumsy local legal order can trigger an international digital blackout.
We analyzed how tech titans are attempting to build financial super apps to monopolize digital behavior, while state governments fiercely battle the center over drawing ecological boundaries on a map to save the physical mountains of the Western Ghats from catastrophic collapse.
It all points back to a central underlying tension. We constantly rely on the fragile assumption that everyone involved in these massive systems will simply play by the rules.
We assume a prime minister will gracefully resign when told. We assume a local contractor will install a mandated fire alarm. And we assume an internet service provider will route our data packets correctly.
But today's deep dive shows us that rules are surprisingly fragile. When they collide with the messy realities of human economics and technological scale, they break. Something for you to mull over. Are we building our modern society on systems of trust that we have outgrown? In an era that increasingly demands verifiable, cryptographic certainty to prevent systemic collapse, can we really afford to run our world on assumptions and paywalled regulations?
That is a phenomenal, necessary question to leave hanging in the air. Thank you for joining us for this incredibly dense, uncompromising journey on the Daily Deep Dive. Stay curious, keep critically questioning the frameworks operating around you, and we will see you next time.